When ruthless gang members target a struggling black single mother's farm, they think she's just another easy victim, until they realize too late she's a former Green Beret sniper. In a battle of survival, courage, and unbreakable love for her daughter, she shows them why you should never underestimate a mother's fury. If you believe in strength, resilience, and heart-pounding redemption, this story will leave you breathless. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and give a thumbs up to support more powerful stories like this. The land stretched wide and open under the heavy noon sun, rolling hills stitched together by cracked dirt roads and crooked fence lines. It was here, in the forgotten spine of America, that Valerie James had carved out a life. Her farm sat stubbornly on the edge of town, a two-story house with peeling white paint, flanked by fields long abandoned by other families who couldn't weather the brutal years of drought, debt, and disappointment. Valerie wiped the sweat from her brow with the back of her hand, setting down the heavy pail of water beside the wilting tomato plants. The worn camouflage jacket she wore wasn't about fashion. It was a relic of a life long buried, from a time when she had been something more than a farmer, something sharper, deadlier. But those days were behind her now. Mostly. A soft voice called out from the porch. "Mama, you coming in?" Valerie turned, her face softening at the sight of her daughter, Ava, standing barefoot on the weathered steps. Ava was only 10, but she carried herself with an uncanny maturity, the kind born from watching too many hard years pass by. "In a minute, baby," Valerie called back, flashing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She bent to pick up the pail again, her muscles rippling under sun-darkened skin. Her body remembered everything, even if her heart wished it could forget. The town had long since learned to leave Valerie alone. Rumors of her past swirled like the dust devils that kicked up on the farm. Some said she was ex-military, others whispered of darker things. But no one really knew. Valerie liked it that way. Fear kept people honest. Or so she thought. Later that evening, after the sun had dipped low and bathed the fields in molten gold, Valerie stood on the porch, watching the horizon. In her gut, something twisted, a feeling she hadn't had in years. Instinct, sharper than any sixth sense, prickled along her spine. Ava sat inside, bent over a worn math book, the kitchen light casting a halo around her tight braids. Valerie's lips pressed into a thin line. She wanted to believe they were safe out here, isolated, forgotten by the world. But trouble had a way of finding you, no matter how far you ran. Across the valley, a pair of trucks rumbled along the dirt road, trailing plumes of dust like dirty ghosts. Valerie's eyes narrowed. Nobody from town drove out this late. And those weren't farmers' trucks. Chrome rims, loud engines, and graffiti-tagged side panels told her everything she needed to know. Gang boys. Probably the same ones who had been spreading like rot through the neighboring counties, sniffing out isolated places to strip clean and burn. Valerie's hand moved instinctively toward the inside pocket of her jacket, fingertips brushing cold steel, the compact pistol she kept with her, just in case. Memories flooded her mind unbidden. Night missions under foreign stars, the sharp crack of gunfire, whispered orders. Her breathing slowed. She wasn't just a single mother. She was a former Green Beret sniper. And she hadn't forgotten a damn thing. The trucks pulled into her long driveway, kicking gravel as they came to a stop just before the old oak tree that marked the boundary of her land. The engines idled for a few seconds before going silent. 3 men climbed out. Big, loud, and young. Tattoos snaked up their necks and arms. One of them, a wiry guy with a buzz cut and a mean grin, spat into the dirt before striding toward the porch. Valerie didn't move. She stood, arms crossed, face unreadable, watching, waiting. "Evening, ma'am," Buzz Cut said, his voice oily with false charm. "Nice little piece of land you got here." Valerie said nothing. Her silence was a weapon as much as her fists had once been. The man chuckled nervously. His companions, a thick-necked bruiser and a jittery kid with darting eyes, hung back, looking around. "You living out here, all by your lonesome?" Buzz Cut continued, stepping onto the bottom porch step uninvited. Still, Valerie didn't speak. She let the silence stretch out until it became a pressure in the air, thick and uncomfortable. Finally, she said, her voice low and measured, "What do you want?" Buzz Cut smiled wider, showing a gold tooth. "Just looking to do a little business. Maybe help you out. Farm like this, lots of opportunities, you know." Help her out. Right. She could smell the lie like rot. Ava's small face appeared briefly in the kitchen window, peeking out from behind the curtains. Valerie caught the movement out of the corner of her eye and felt her resolve harden into iron. "Not interested," she said, stepping forward so that the men could feel the full weight of her presence. She wasn't tall, but she moved like someone who had killed before, efficiently, precisely, without hesitation. Buzz Cut's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He recognized something in her. Predators always could spot the bigger threat. "You might want to think about that," he said, voice colder now. "Wouldn't want anything bad happening out here. Things get real lonely. Accidents happen. Nobody around to help. Threats. Amateur ones at that." Valerie tilted her head, studying him the way a panther might study a stumbling deer. "You've got 5 seconds to get off my land," she said softly. Buzz Cut laughed, but it was brittle. He turned to his buddies. "Hear that? Lady thinks she's got some kind of power." Valerie didn't argue. She simply reached into her jacket, slow and deliberate, and pulled the pistol free. It gleamed darkly in the fading light. She held it low, nonchalant, but the message was clear. Buzz Cut's bravado drained away. He raised his hands mockingly at first, but when Valerie's gaze didn't flicker, didn't soften, something in him cracked. He backed away, muttering under his breath. "Crazy bitch," he spat. "You're gonna regret this." They piled back into the trucks, engines roaring as they peeled out, spraying gravel. Valerie stood still on the porch, the pistol steady in her hand, her face carved from stone. Only when the taillights disappeared into the dusk did she finally relax her grip. Inside, Ava was crying silently at the kitchen table. Valerie crouched beside her, pulling the girl into a fierce hug. "It's okay, baby," she whispered into Ava's braids. "Ain't nobody gonna hurt us. I promise." But in her heart, she knew it wasn't over. Those boys would be back. And next time, they wouldn't come alone. That night, after Ava had finally fallen asleep clutching her worn stuffed bear, Valerie sat at the kitchen table, a single dim light burning overhead. Before her, maps were spread across the scarred wood surface, hand-drawn layouts of the farm, the fields, the tree-line that bordered the property. Old instincts stirred like restless wolves inside her. Every approach angle, every blind spot, every line of sight. She mapped them all again, mentally reinforcing what she already knew by heart. She was outnumbered, outgunned likely. They'd come back angry, maybe emboldened with more muscle and firepower. But this land was hers, her father's land, her daughter's future. She would not run. She would not beg. She would make them regret ever setting foot here. Valerie leaned back, closing her eyes briefly. Her mind drifted back to distant deserts and jungles, to whispered operations deep behind enemy lines. She hadn't survived those missions by luck. She survived because she had become something unstoppable. A ghost, a shadow, death on silent wings. When she opened her eyes again, they were cold and clear. At first light, she started preparing. The battered old barn became a fortress. Valerie boarded up the windows with thick plywood, reinforcing the doors from the inside. Strategic lines of barbed wire, half buried in tall grass, turned the most obvious approaches into traps. In the fields, she planted crude but effective alarms, tripwires attached to tin cans and glass bottles, strung low between fence posts. Even the faintest disturbance would sound like gunshots in the night. From the attic, she retrieved an old case she had sworn never to open again. The latches stuck stubbornly, but finally gave way with a metallic shriek. Inside, her old M24 sniper rifle, its matte black surface lovingly maintained even after all these years. Alongside it, her dog tags, a faded photo of her unit, and a crumpled letter from a commander long since buried. She ran her fingers over the rifle, feeling its familiar weight, and a grim smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "Welcome back, old friend." By mid-afternoon, Ava noticed the changes. She stood silently in the kitchen doorway, clutching a peanut butter sandwich, eyes wide as she watched her mother work. "Are we going to war?" Ava asked in a small voice. Valerie crouched, brushing a stray braid from her daughter's forehead. She forced a gentle smile. "No, baby," she said. "But we have to be ready, just in case." Ava hesitated, then whispered, "I'm scared." Valerie pulled her close, heart breaking at the fear in her daughter's voice. But she couldn't afford to lie. "Not now." "It's okay to be scared," she said. "Courage isn't about not feeling scared. It's about doing what you have to, even when you're afraid." Ava nodded solemnly, her small hands clutching Valerie's jacket tightly. "Will you protect me?" Valerie hugged her tighter. "With my life." As dusk bled across the sky, Valerie climbed up to the farmhouse roof, rifle slung across her back. She lay flat against the shingles, scanning the tree line through her scope. The land around her seemed to hold its breath. Crickets fell silent. Then movement. At the edge of the woods, headlights flared to life. One truck. 2, 3, 4. Figures spilled from the vehicles, silhouetted against the dying light. They moved like wolves, slow, confident, certain of the kill. Flashlights stabbed through the growing darkness, slicing across the fields. But none reached as far as the rooftop where Valerie lay. She adjusted the scope slightly, heart rate steady, breathing slow, muscles loose. They thought they were hunting prey, but they were walking straight into the jaws of something far older, far deadlier. The leader, Buzzcut, stood near the center, barking orders. Some of the men carried bats, others crowbars. A few had guns tucked carelessly into waistbands. Valerie's finger rested lightly on the trigger. Not yet. She wasn't going to start a war unless they forced her hand. But if they set foot past the boundary oak, her scope tracked them methodically, assessing, measuring, choosing. Buzzcut waved 2 men forward. They moved toward the porch, flashlights bobbing. The first tripwire caught them by surprise. The tin cans exploded with a metallic clatter, echoing across the field like a starter's pistol. Both men jumped back, startled. Shouts rang out. Confusion rippled through the group. Valerie smiled grimly. First blood. Psychological warfare. She hadn't fired a shot, but already they were rattled. Buzzcut shouted again, angrier this time. The men regrouped, more cautious now. Another pair split off, circling toward the back of the house. Valerie tracked them through the scope, muscles coiled. If they got close to the barn, she shifted, lining up the first intruder's leg in her crosshairs. A clean, disabling shot. No kill shots yet, only warnings. Injuries they couldn't ignore. Her breathing slowed further, reaching the deep, timeless rhythm she had mastered years ago. Inhale. Hold. Squeeze. The rifle barked once. The man screamed and collapsed, clutching his thigh. His partner froze in place, terror written across his face. The message was clear now. You are being hunted. Buzzcut roared in frustration, waving the others forward. Valerie chambered another round, her mind already 3 moves ahead. She didn't need to defeat them all at once. She just needed to break them, piece by piece. And she would. The wounded man writhed on the ground, crying out for help. His comrades hesitated, clustered together like nervous cattle, uncertain whether to move forward or retreat. Buzzcut's rage was visible even from the rooftop, his fists clenched, his face flushed an ugly red. You bunch of babies. She's one woman, he bellowed. Get your asses in there. But the bravado was cracking. Valerie could see it in their body language, the quick glances over their shoulders, the tighter grips on their weapons, the way they flinched at every shadow. Another shot rang out, this time slamming into the ground inches from a second thug's boot. He yelped and stumbled back, nearly falling over the wounded man. Panic bloomed. One of the younger ones, maybe no older than 19, dropped his crowbar and ran for the trucks. Buzzcut cursed and grabbed him by the collar, dragging him back. But fear was a wildfire once sparked. Valerie watched, measuring. This was how battles were truly won, not just with weapons, but with fear, with psychology, with making the enemy question everything. And she hadn't even begun to fight dirty yet. Meanwhile, inside the farmhouse, Ava sat under the kitchen table, clutching her stuffed bear and listening with wide, frightened eyes. Every gunshot, every shout outside made her flinch. But she remembered her mother's words. Courage isn't not being scared. It's doing what you have to even when you are. She whispered it to herself like a prayer, squeezing the bear tighter. Mommy was out there. Mommy was fighting for them. She had to be brave too. Outside, Buzz Cut regrouped, spitting angry orders. "Light it up," he snapped. "Burn her out if you have to." Two men sprinted back to the trucks, returning with jugs of gasoline. They fanned out, splashing fuel along the porch, the front steps, even the barn. Valerie's eyes narrowed. This was it, the line she couldn't let them cross. She rolled to her knees, drawing a bead on the first man, uncapping a matchbook. Inhale. Hold. Squeeze. The shot blasted the gas jug in his hands, igniting it instantly. Flames whooshed upward, engulfing him in a roaring fireball. He dropped, rolling and screaming in agony. Panic exploded through the gang. Some dropped everything and ran for the trucks. Others froze, paralyzed by the sight of their burning comrade. Buzz Cut stood rigid, caught between fury and disbelief. Valerie worked methodically, chambering the next round. She wasn't aiming to kill, but neither was she going to let them destroy her home. Every bullet spoke a single, brutal command. Leave. Or die. Inside, smoke started to curl under the front door from the burning porch. Ava coughed, her tiny body shaking. Valerie slid down from a roof, landing silently in the dirt. She slipped into the kitchen through the back door, dropping to one knee beside her daughter. "We have to move, baby," she whispered. "You trust me?" Ava nodded fiercely, eyes shining with unshed tears. "Good girl," Valerie said, lifting her. "Hold on tight, okay? No matter what." Ava buried her face in Valerie's neck as her mother moved, swift and silent as a wraith, through the thickening smoke. Outside, chaos ruled. Half the gang had fled already, their trucks peeling out and throwing gravel into the air. Buzz Cut, stubborn to the end, rallied the few who remained, shouting about money, about pride, about not backing down to some black bitch on a farm. Valerie's jaw tightened. She tucked Ava into the hidden cellar door behind the barn, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I'll be back," she promised. "No matter what, stay hidden until I come." Ava nodded, swallowing her sobs, brave to the core. Valerie pulled the cellar door shut, camouflaging it with loose hay. Then she turned back toward the burning farmhouse, and the last few men who still thought they could beat her. She welcomed them with fire. Buzz Cut charged the barn with two others, weapons drawn. Valerie moved like a ghost among the smoke and shadows, her sniper rifle discarded now for a battered combat knife and a length of chain. One man lunged at her. She sidestepped, fluid and efficient, catching his wrist and twisting until the crowbar clattered from his hand. With a brutal pivot, she drove her knee into his ribs, dropping him with a whimper. The second came from behind, but Valerie had already anticipated him. She spun, whipping the chain around his throat and yanking backward. He went down gasping, kicking helplessly against the dirt. Buzz Cut stood alone now, panting wide-eyed. "You're dead, bitch," he snarled, pulling a pistol from his waistband. Valerie's voice cut through the smoke like steel. "You should have stayed in the truck." Buzz Cut fired wildly, but Valerie was already moving, a blur of muscle and instinct. The bullet missed by inches. She closed the distance in 3 strides, knocking the gun aside and driving her fist into his solar plexus. He doubled over, wheezing. Valerie grabbed the back of his head and slammed it into the barn wall, hard enough to leave a dent. He crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Silence settled over the farm. The fire smoldered, the night air thick with the smell of gunpowder and gasoline. Valerie stood alone, battered but unbroken. She looked out over the wreckage, the trucks abandoned, the bodies groaning in the dirt, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself a slow, grim smile. She walked back to the cellar and gently lifted the door. Ava launched into her arms, sobbing. "You did it, Mommy," she cried. "You saved us." Valerie hugged her tight, burying her face in her daughter's hair. "No, baby," she murmured. "We saved each other." The faint sound of sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder as they approached. Valerie tightened her arms around Ava, every muscle in her body still tense, alert. She didn't trust easily, and she trusted authority even less. But she couldn't fight the whole world alone. Not anymore. Not with Ava depending on her. She carried her daughter toward the barn, setting her down gently behind an old tractor. "Stay here, baby," she whispered. "Watch. Listen. If anything feels wrong, you hide just like we practiced. Understand?" Ava nodded, wiping her tear-streaked face with her sleeve. Valerie gave her a small smile. "My brave girl." Then she stepped out into the open, smoke swirling around her, the ruined gang members groaning on the dirt, flames still crackling from the porch. A battlefield. Her battlefield. 2 sheriff's cruisers roared up the driveway, tires skidding on loose gravel. Doors flew open, and deputies poured out, guns drawn, faces hard. "Drop your weapon," one shouted when he spotted Valerie's knife still in her hand. Slowly, Valerie crouched and placed it on the ground, raising her hands. Her every move was measured, controlled. She could dismantle any one of them in seconds if she had to. But not tonight. One of the older sheriffs, a stocky man with a thick gray mustache, approached cautiously. His badge read Sheriff Hodges. He scanned the scene, the bodies, the fire, the battered woman standing alone and unbowed. His eyes narrowed with grim understanding. "Somebody want to tell me what the hell happened here?" he muttered. Before Valerie could answer, one of the gang members, still conscious, a scrawny, bleeding man, raised his head. "She's crazy," he gasped. "She ambushed us." Valerie tilted her head, calm and deadly. "I defended my home," she said, voice even. "They came armed. They came to hurt my daughter. You can check their trucks for weapons and gas cans if you need evidence." Hodges frowned, stroking his mustache. He barked an order to his deputies. "Secure the scene. Check those vehicles. Get the EMTs in here." As his men moved, he turned back to Valerie, studying her more closely. There was something about her stance, the way she scanned every movement, the way her feet were always positioned for balance. Military. Special forces, maybe. She wasn't just some scared civilian. "You ex-military?" he asked, voice lower. Valerie met his eyes without flinching. "Green Beret. Retired." Hodges let out a long breath, like a puzzle piece had just clicked into place. "Figures," he muttered. He turned to the nearest gang member, jabbing a finger at him. "You're under arrest for trespassing, assault, attempted arson, and whatever else we can pile on after we search your truck." The man howled protests, but the deputies weren't listening. They snapped on cuffs, hauling the moaning men to their feet one by one. As the chaos settled, Valerie slipped back to the barn to collect Ava. The little girl ran into her arms, clinging tightly. "Are we safe now, Mommy?" she whispered. Valerie glanced over her shoulder at the flashing lights, the arrested men, the burning ruins of their porch. "Safe, maybe, but never complacent. Safer than before," she murmured. "But we'll always be ready. Always." Ava nodded solemnly, like a soldier receiving orders. Valerie kissed the top of her head, feeling a fierce pride in her daughter, in the strength she was already showing. The next few hours passed in a blur. Deputies took statements. Fire crews hosed down the smoldering remains of the porch. Paramedics tended to minor injuries. At some point, Sheriff Hodges returned with 2 cups of strong black coffee, handing one to Valerie without a word. She accepted it with a nod of thanks. "You did good," he said quietly, standing beside her. "Real good." Valerie said nothing. Compliments didn't matter. Ava was alive. That was all that mattered. After a long moment, Hodges cleared his throat. "Not that it's any of my business," he said, "but if you ever wanted a job, we're short on good deputies." Valerie gave a small, wry smile. "I think I've had enough of carrying guns for other people," she said. Hodges chuckled. "Fair enough." He looked around the battered farm, at the broken fences, the scorched porch, the bloodstains in the dirt. "You gonna be okay here?" Valerie's eyes swept the land she had fought for, their land, the soil her grandparents had tilled, the house her father had built with his own 2 hands. She nodded, quiet steel in her voice. This is home. And she would fight for it again if she had to. No one, no gang, no threat would ever drive them out. Later, when the last cruiser disappeared down the long dirt road and the stars blanketed the sky, Valerie sat on the porch steps with Ava curled against her side. The air smelled like rain and ashen earth. Their home wounded, but still standing. Ava's eyelids drooped with exhaustion, but she mumbled, "You're like a superhero, Mommy." Valerie smiled into the dark. "No, baby," she said. "I'm just your mom, and that's all the superpower I need." She sat there long after Ava fell asleep, cradling her daughter, watching the horizon with sharp eyes. Waiting, protecting, ready. Because out here, in this rough, wild world, a mother's love wasn't just gentle. It was a weapon, and Valerie was the deadliest weapon they'd ever seen. The next morning, the sun rose over Carter Farm, casting a warm glow across the battered landscape. Ash and soot dusted the ground where the porch once stood. Broken fence posts leaned drunkenly in the fields. But the farmhouse itself still stood tall, scarred but undefeated. Valerie stood at the edge of the fields, arms crossed, Ava perched on her hip. They surveyed the damage together. "What do we do now, Mommy?" Ava asked, voice small. Valerie squeezed her gently. "We rebuild," she said simply. Stronger than before. There was no room for self-pity, no time for fear. This was their home. They would not be driven from it. Word of the attack spread through the small rural town like wildfire. At first, there were whispers. Then outrage. Then action. Neighbors who had once kept their distance, unsure about the black single mother who lived alone on the old Carter place, now showed up with hammers, nails, and casseroles. Some out of guilt, some out of gratitude, all out of respect. Mr. Jenkins, the grizzled rancher from 2 miles down the road, arrived first with his pickup loaded with lumber. "Don't say a word, girl," he grunted, hauling boards onto his shoulder. "Just point me to where you want the new porch." Valerie arched an eyebrow, but nodded in silent thanks. Pride had no place here. One by one, the community came together, patching fences, clearing debris, hauling broken beams away from the farmhouse. A quiet army. Not trained soldiers like Valerie had once commanded, but good, decent people determined to stand with her now. Ava raced between them with a child's energy, handing out water bottles and hammering in nails with a plastic toy hammer. Watching her daughter laugh again, free, unafraid, brought a tightness to Valerie's chest that no battlefield ever had. This was what she fought for. But peace, as Valerie knew too well, was fragile. And it never lasted long. 3 nights later, as the last of the work crews packed up and the stars blinked overhead, Sheriff Hodges returned with a grim expression. Valerie met him halfway down the driveway, already sensing trouble. She read his posture like a field report. Stiff shoulders, clenched jaw, averted eyes. Bad news. "You need to hear this," he said, voice low. He handed her a manila folder thick with reports and photographs. Valerie flipped it open with steady hands. Inside were surveillance photos from a nearby county. Grainy images of a heavy-set man with cruel eyes and a snake tattoo coiled around his neck. Tobias Creel, leader of the regional biker gang, older brother to one of the men Valerie had put in the hospital. And he was looking for payback. Hodges' voice was grim. "Word is, Creel's rounding up some of the other gangs. Planning something big. They want revenge. And they're pissed it was you who humiliated them." Valerie closed the folder slowly. So it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. She stared out across the fields, the moonlight painting silver ribbons across the wheat. This land was soaked in her family's blood, sweat, and history. She would not abandon it. Her grip tightened on the folder. If they wanted a war, they would get one. Over the next few days, Valerie prepared. While Ava played with the dogs and helped the neighbors rebuild the chicken coop, Valerie trained. Harder than she had in years. She set up observation posts on the property, hidden trail cameras, homemade alarms strung between trees, reinforced doors, and window braces. She mapped every inch of the land, every blind spot, every tactical advantage. She cleaned her old rifle, a battered but beloved Remington 700 she had carried through a dozen missions overseas. Her calloused hands moved over the weapon like a prayer. She checked the sights, adjusted the scope, ran endless dry-fire drills until muscle memory took over. At night, when Ava was asleep, she sat at the kitchen table with maps and contingency plans spread around her. If they came in trucks, she knew where the choke points were. If they came on foot, she had fallback positions. If they tried to smoke her out, she had countermeasures. She wasn't just defending a farm. She was defending her legacy. And she would make them pay for every inch they tried to take. Meanwhile, the town grew uneasy. Murals of graffiti appeared overnight on fences and stores. Threats painted in crude red letters. Paybacks coming. No escape. Store owners locked up early. Men walked in groups with rifles slung over their shoulders. Children were kept inside after sundown. It was like the old Wild West had returned, lawless and tense. But Valerie refused to be intimidated. When the local pastor offered to shelter her and Ava at the church, she smiled and said, "Thank you, but no. They'll have to come here, and I'll be ready." One night, after putting Ava to bed with a kiss and a whispered prayer, Valerie stood on the porch, now rebuilt stronger than before, cradling her rifle in the crook of her arm. The moon hung heavy and full above the fields. A cold wind whispered through the wheat. And in the far-off distance, beyond the last row of trees, a single headlight blinked on. Then another, and another. Engines growled in the dark, like wolves gathering at the edge of the woods. Valerie's eyes narrowed. Her heartbeat slowed. They were coming, and they had no idea they were walking into the fight of their lives. The engines rumbled closer, low and menacing. Their headlights flared through the trees, casting monstrous shadows across the fields. Valerie moved with silent precision. She tucked Ava's door shut with a soft click, her daughter sleeping peacefully, unaware of the storm gathering outside. Then she turned off every light inside the house, plunging it into darkness. Only the stars above and the distant hellish glow of approaching motorcycles lit the world now. Valerie slid onto the rooftop, her rifle slung across her back, her movements fluid and deliberate. From up here, she had the perfect vantage point, full view of the winding dirt road leading to her front gate. The dogs, sensing her tension, crouched silently at the corners of the porch, growling low and deep. Good boys, she thought. Loyal, fierce, ready. Tobias Creel's convoy tore down the dirt road, a river of noise and fury. There must have been 15, maybe 20 bikes and pickups, loaded with men shouting, jeering, waving chains, bats, and guns. Creel himself led the charge, a hulking brute of a man, his face twisted into a grin of cruel anticipation. He wasn't worried. In his mind, he was riding toward an easy slaughter. A lone woman and her kid. An abandoned farm. No threat. He couldn't have been more wrong. As the first truck smashed through Valerie's front gate, a hidden tripwire triggered. There was a deafening boom, a spray of shrapnel and dirt exploding into the air. The lead truck veered sideways, flipping into a ditch. Screams erupted. Panic bloomed like wildfire. Valerie moved fast, steady hands lifting her rifle. Through the scope, the chaos sharpened into focus. She exhaled slowly, controlling her breathing, just like she'd been trained. One shot, one kill. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked against her shoulder. A biker charging across the field dropped like a marionette with its strings cut. Before the others could react, she chambered another round and fired again. Another enemy fell. Then another. Every shot deliberate. Every shot devastating. Below, the gang scrambled for cover, screaming at each other. They're up in the house. Get the woman. Move, move, move. They fired wildly at the farmhouse, but Valerie was already repositioning, slipping like a ghost from the rooftop to the attic window, changing angles, sowing confusion. She wasn't fighting defensively. She was fighting like a Green Beret sniper. Control the battlefield. Force them into choke points. Bleed them dry. Tobias Creel roared orders, veins bulging in his thick neck. Circle around. Box her in. Burn the place if you have to. For men broke off, running toward the barn where Valerie kept the livestock. But as they breached the door, a second trap triggered, a homemade flashbang wired to a tripwire. The barn exploded with a blinding light and deafening boom. The men staggered back, blinded, coughing, dropping their weapons. Valerie picked them off one by one. Precise, ruthless, unrelenting. Inside the house, Ava stirred in her sleep, but Valerie's planning held firm. The reinforced safe room under Ava's bedroom, hidden behind a false wall, remained untouched. Her daughter was safe. Valerie fought with the calm, brutal efficiency of a woman who had seen war and survived it. She knew when to push, when to hold, and she knew when to end it. The battle raged for what felt like an eternity. Engines revving, guns barking, men shouting. And then, silence. The gang lay broken and scattered across the fields. Their trucks wrecked, their weapons abandoned. Only Tobias Creel remained, staggering up the front steps, blood trickling from a graze across his forehead, shotgun clutched in trembling hands. He kicked open the front door, bellowing, "Come out, you bitch. Face me." Valerie was already waiting. She stepped out of the shadows, her boots silent on the wooden floor. Rifle slung across her back now, knife glinting in her hand. "You're standing on my land," she said, voice low, cold as winter steel. "And you're not leaving." Creel roared and charged. But Valerie moved like water, sidestepping, striking. The knife flashed once, twice, disarming him, sending the shotgun skittering across the floor. She dropped him with a brutal, practice throw, pinning him face down. Creel groaned, stunned, trying to rise. Valerie crouched beside him, pressing the blade to his throat. She leaned close, her voice a whisper meant only for him. "You thought you were hunting prey," she said, "but you wandered into a battlefield." Tobias Creel, leader of the gang, feared across counties, whimpered. The sheriff's sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Back up at last. But Valerie didn't need them anymore. By the time Hodges and his deputies arrived, the fight was already over. They found Valerie standing calmly on the porch, arms crossed, Ava hugging her side. The field behind her was littered with defeated men. Sheriff Hodges took one look at the scene, shook his head, and muttered, "Remind me never to get on your bad side, Carter." Valerie smiled grimly. "You'd be smart not to." In the days that followed, Valerie became a legend. The story spread like wildfire of the black single mother, the former Green Beret sniper, who defended her farm against an army of thugs. People who had once whispered about her now openly admired her, respected her, feared her even. But Valerie didn't care about the attention. All she cared about was that Carter Farm stood unbroken. Ava laughed freely under the open sky, and the blood-soaked past stayed buried where it belonged. They had fought for their home, and they had won. Weeks later, the fields bloomed again. Wildflowers stretched across the hills in vibrant waves of color, and the wind carried the scent of new life. Valerie sat on the porch with a cup of coffee in her hand, Ava curled beside her sketching pictures of horses and dogs in a worn notebook. The morning sun bathed everything in gold. It was peaceful now. Real peace, not the fragile, waiting for the next shoe to drop kind. She watched as Duke and Ranger, her loyal dogs, patrolled the fence line, tails wagging, muscles rippling with easy strength. They too had survived the storm. They too had earned their rest. Ava looked up from her drawings, her young face beaming with pride. "Mom," she said, "when I grow up, I want to be strong like you." Valerie smiled, a real, deep smile that reached her soul. She set down her coffee and pulled Ava close, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "You already are, baby girl," she whispered. "You already are." They stayed there for a long time, mother and daughter, watching the sunrise chase away the last shadows of the past. The Carter farm stood tall against the horizon, a symbol of resilience, of blood-earned peace. And as the world turned, Valerie Carter promised herself one thing. No matter what came next, no matter who threatened what she loved, she would be ready. She would always protect her own. Because some warriors never stop fighting. They just find better reasons to draw their line in the sand. And Valerie Carter's line was drawn forever.